Hopefully you all were enjoying the music as we get ready now to start our class tonight. I am recording the session, so if for any reason you wish to not be recorded, you can drop from the call. How's everyone doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yep.
All right, yes.
Okay, all right, good, good. So I am your instructor for tonight, Melissa Randall, along with our co-instructor, Alan Marshall, and I will just do a little brief introduction of myself, and then I will let Alan introduce himself to you. So again, my name is Melissa Randall. I've been with the company almost 28 years in various roles. I am currently a solution trained engineer in the Consumer Technology Experience Organization, which you all may be familiar with as att.com, my AT&T, just among a couple of applications just to name. And we are also known as the digital team. So a lot of things come through our organization. So some of you, I recognize some names here that I see either in my organization or people that I've worked with in the past. So welcome. I know that you all have probably had a very long day, and I commend you for making this commitment to get your PMP certification. I've actually been PMP certified since 2006, and I've been teaching these classes since 2007. So I can't believe it's been that long. I thoroughly enjoy teaching. I have a lot of fun doing it. I want to make this an interactive class, and I'm going to turn it over to Alan now so he can introduce himself to you, and then we'll get started.
Hey, y'all. I'm Alan. I think I met most of y'all last week. I co-instructed last Monday's class along with Cindy. But if in case y'all didn't get a chance, my name's Alan Marshall. 21 years with the company. Just recently got PMP certified back in July, so I'm a rookie, I guess you could say. This will be my second class that I co-instruct. And eventually I'll take that leap into, teaching a full-fledged class. So I appreciate the opportunity for sure, and just say keep it up, everyone. It's a tough road, but it's achievable and well worth it.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for letting us know that you did just recently complete your PMP certification, and congratulations. So you are able to share some of the recent things with the students that you have experienced, because it's been a long time since I've taken the test, and I can tell you there's been a lot of changes over the years. If I could give you all one tip that I would say would help you, is to think about it from PMI's point of view as you are preparing and learning the material that we are presenting to you, because here at AT&T, we do things a certain way, which may be different from the way PMI does it. You may run into terms and different things that PMI is using that you may not have come across in your day-to-day role, or even in a previous role that you may have held at another company or within AT&T. So that would be the one thing that I can say, is just definitely keep that PMI hat on. And that's what you need to do to focus, so you can pass this exam, and then you can go back to doing it your way that you do in your day-to-day job here at AT&T. And as we go throughout the material, if you have any questions, or if I'm speaking too fast, or if you need me to go back through, Marshall's going to help me watch the chat. And then I would ask too, if you're not speaking, if you would just stay on mute, that would cut down on any background noise that we can experience. But I really do want the class to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. So this is
really quickly.
Yes.
Do you have the slides for this? Because they weren't available. Because it looks like they're different than what you have put up now, the ones that we have. That was in the chat.
Oh, okay. I think Brian had posted that earlier. I just have the instructor slides that we use for the presentation, and I thought that he normally would send that out, and also as a PDF version too, so that you have this material as part of your study. So I don't know if Brian is still online right now. Alan, I don't know if you can try and ping him to see if he has it, or if he can post that in the chat for the students, and if not, we can make sure we get that to you after the class.
Yeah, I'll try to ping him now.
If
Okay,
anyone was
thank you.
having
trouble before getting access to the student bundle. I just got access like right before this call. I got an email. So maybe if you want to check your email, you might already have access to it. So they're probably going through the list that we had submitted about people having trouble and getting those people access. So you might want to check that.
Thanks, Lindsay, a voice from the past.
Yeah, hey. Like I
Yes,
literally
did you have
got
a
the email.
question?
I got the email at like 4 p.m. Eastern. I was invited to
Okay.
the PMN partner platform at PMI. So that
Okay.
gives me access to all the materials.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll make sure that the other students that you get that information as well. So our class is scheduled to end at 5 Pacific, 7 Central, but if we get to the material earlier, which, you know, we may be able to, because tonight's lesson covers 24 slides of material. So this is lesson 2, so part of it you will get later in your next class. So what we're going to focus on today as we talk about starting the project is to identify and engage stakeholders. So that's the piece that is going to be our focus for tonight's class. And we'll be going through those concepts and processes that are related to it. Okay, so here are objectives. Now, these objectives cover the entire lesson 2, but again, we're just going to be focusing on identify and engage stakeholders. But by the time you complete lesson 2, you will have gone through all of these objectives. So to define and discuss stakeholders and the most effective way to communicate with them, we'll definitely be covering that tonight. Explain the best ways to form a team, how to build the most effective understanding of a project, and how doing so relates to executing a project successfully. And then explain how predictive and adaptive project life cycles work, explain what a hybrid development approach is, and then decide which kind of development approach or life cycle is best suited for work. So again, these are all of the objectives that you will get throughout lesson 2, but our focus tonight is on identifying and engaging our stakeholders. So that's our topic A. Let me put this in slideshow mode too. Can make this a little bit easier, hopefully, to view. Like there's a little delay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here, when we start our projects, we really want to think of the stakeholders. We want to always keep them in mind because we want to establish effective relationships in our communication that we're going to have with them so that we can maintain the focus on the project and then what it means to those individuals as well as a group. And as project managers, you're going to spend a lot of time communicating. Probably 90% of what you do is going to be some form of communication, either verbal, written, face-to-face meetings with people. So that's why it's such an important piece of the project management world is communication and then our stakeholders, because these are the people who are going to be impacted by the project in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to delve into how do we go about identifying these stakeholders, how do we engage them, and then in lesson 4, you're going to get some additional information about stakeholder management and how to best communicate and collaborate with them. Okay, so here are some of our typical project stakeholders. Now this is, as I was saying, I would like the class to be interactive, so you can come off mute and we can talk about some of these questions. So we want to be able to categorize these stakeholders. So we see this list on the slide. We have end users, customers, employees, which we all are. We have organizations, some of us are managers, we have sponsors, we have business partners that we work with, suppliers and contractors, we have our government, and then we have our community. So our first question here is which are typically project team members and which ones are not? So who would like to come off mute and either say who's a project member or who wouldn't be part of your project team as an actual member? Anyone want to go for a guess? Go for the easy one.
Employees would be
So
a typical team member, right?
Yes,
Okay.
they would be. What about the government?
Yes, depending on the project, yes, you're on, yes.
So So typically, when you think about like government agencies, so most likely they probably won't be a part of your project team. Now, if you were working on some type of government effort, then I would say yes, right, they could be. We have our community, right? So if you have organizations that are out in the community, they may be a stakeholder because they could be impacted by what you're going to do, but they may not be a part of that project team. So we think about the people who are working on the project and who are like part of that day to day, and is helping us to deliver whatever that product or service that we may be doing. And so their level of involvement is going to vary, right? So if you think about maybe projects that you have worked on and some of the team members that you have, now maybe their managers are not involved on a day-to-day basis, right? But if there's some kind of escalation, or if you need their assistance with something, you may go and pull in other managers. Or if you're building something where you have an external customer that would need to be a part of it, then you can have people, either be part of the project team or maybe some ad hoc members that you would call in to work on that project for you.
Yeah,
So
and I would say from a when you talk about government, just think about everything we do at AT&T. There's usually some sort of government involvement, when it comes to, regulations and things like that. So when a project comes about, sometimes, we have to include the government, but they're not generally on the project team. Although the end result might have to, we might have to send that to the government for their approval, but they're not going to be the ones working on the actual project.
Right. So when you think about it, when you think about your stakeholders, these are people who could be affected by this project, right? Either a decision that is made, some activity that we're doing, or the overall outcome of the project. So that's why, as you think about some of the various stakeholders that you could have, and then what's their particular role, and we'll get into more in our later slides on how you identify some of these stakeholders and things that can help you to be able to manage them. Does anyone have any questions about any of typical project stakeholders? Let me go back up here for a moment. So, and I wanted to show you, so in the slides, you'll see that I'll click on like that little, looks like a little book, because that's a piece of information that PMI wants you to be aware of. So this is the formal definition of a stakeholder, and I'll read it. An individual, group, or organization that may be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project, program, or portfolio. So if you are putting together different study material, I know when I studied for the exam, I made flashcards. So something like this, I would have put this definition on a flashcard so I can help you to remember it later on, because you may get a question in the exam where they're wanting you to explain, what a stakeholder is, so that you'd have some understanding of what that may be. Now, this next slide is going to talk about our stakeholder and communications management. Just trying to get the full thing to paint. So here we're going to get into our stakeholder register, and you'll see an example of what that's going to look like. Our stakeholder engagement plan, our communications management plan, the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, or SEAM for short, and the assessment grids, matrices, and models. So these are things that we're going to cover throughout this lesson tonight, so you'll get a view of what each one of these, what it is, and then what it's used for. And so depending upon the size and complexity of your project, you may or may not have to use all of these. So obviously, if it's very complex, you may use all 5 of these. If it's something on a small effort, you may only use, 1 or 2 of them. So it really will depend on the complexity of your project, and then looking at the number of stakeholders that you have, and then how you have to communicate with them. So these are just some of the tools and things that you would use to be able to help you to do that. Because again, these are the people who are going to be impacted in some way, shape, or form by your project. Now we get into stakeholder identification, right? So who are they? So they said we can check the business case, which everyone should have on your project. So remember, in PMI's world, there's always a business case. And even for projects here at AT&T, we typically will have a business case too. We have the benefits management plan for the name, so who those individual stakeholders are going to be. And then as we progress through the life cycle of the project, some of the other places where you can find stakeholders that maybe didn't come up at the beginning of your project. So issues log or impediments log is another term, change log, requirements document. So you may find different names of people who actually are stakeholders. So that's why it's not a one and done type of situation where you just at the beginning of the project, you go in and say, I have 10 stakeholders and that's it. By the time you're done with, the project, you might have 50 stakeholders because you want to look at it throughout the life cycle of the project. And so PMI wants you to know that we look at their relationship. So what is their interest in the project, their involvement, or their interdependencies amongst those stakeholders, what is their influence, and then their potential impact on the project success. And here at the bottom, which is what I was saying, you want to identify and engage stakeholders early to avoid surprises later in the project, right? So we want to know these are the people who are going to be impacted, but we also want to make sure we don't leave anyone out. So that's why this second bullet talks about as you progress throughout the project later on, you may have an issue come up, some kind of change request that has come up, and now some new stakeholders have been identified. So then you'll be able to make sure that those people are kept in the loop as well. Any questions on the stakeholder identification piece so far? Now, the other thing that PMI, you may hear the term like project charter. I know years ago we used to use those here at AT&T, and I haven't seen one of those lately, but in PMI's world, that is still a very important document in how projects get kicked off. So usually in that document, it will let you know who your internal and your external stakeholders are, and again, you'll be able to add to that as you go throughout the project, because you really don't want to leave anyone out. Because let's say there was a stakeholder that came up on the end, or somewhere in the middle of your project, you're just getting through requirements, and then someone was left off, then that could create a problem for you, because then you'd have to go back and now try to make sure that their needs are cared for so that you can deliver a successful project. Any questions on this slide? Okay, we'll go on to the next. So we want to assess our stakeholders, and there's another formal definition here. So let me start with that. Stakeholder analysis is a technique of systematically gathering and analyzing quantitative and qualitative information to determine whose interests should be considered throughout the project. So again, if you are making any flashcards or any other study material, you want to add this to your list so you can remember this definition. So some of the ways that we can do this assessment of our stakeholders, so data gathering, right? I'm sure everyone's familiar with questionnaires, surveys. We've all taken them in some way, shape, or form. Brainstorming, that's just a technique when people get together and just throw out, ideas. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just for people to just throw those ideas out there, and then you can assess those later. And then for our and then what you can do here too is part of your data gathering when you are going through like the questionnaires and surveys or your brainstorming. You can ask your team if they've worked with any of the stakeholders before, or if they're familiar with them, because oftentimes you do cross paths with some of the same individuals. And so that's good to know, because then you've already had that relationship with them. And if not, you may have to go through a series of questions and answers to make sure that everybody is, get everybody on the same page, and make sure, again, we're not leaving anyone out. When we talk about our data analysis, for data analysis for stakeholder analysis, so what are their stake in the project, right? So their interests, rights, ownerships, knowledge, contribution. So how is this stakeholder going to be impacted by this project? And no two people are alike. So their needs of, a customer A versus customer B may be different, but you want to just make sure you're taking all these things into consideration, because this helps you not to leave anything out as you are going through this. And so when they talked about the quantitative and qualitative, so looking at the actual number of stakeholders, the quality of those stakeholders, and different people are going to weight higher than others. And then as we get through the other parts of the slide, there's going to be more information on how you can go in and do that analysis. Okay, then we have our data representation. So this gets into some of the actual models that you can use to help you quantify these stakeholders. So there's the two-dimensional models that talk about power and interest, power and influence, impact and influence, right? So when you think about power, there's realized power that people truly have, maybe based on their role. If they're vice president, they have power because they're an executive. But also, when you're working on a team with people, you can also have power and influence too. It just depends on your skill set, what's needed. So these models can help you figure out how you can go in and then quantify your stakeholders. There's a 3D grid, which is called a stakeholder cube, and then the salience model. So we're going to look at all of these in more detail. Now, the salience model is something you would typically use for a very large, more complex type of effort, because you'll have a lot more stakeholders, a lot more relationships and things that you're going to have to manage. On a smaller scale, I was saying that you may not have to do, you may just have your register that shows you all of your stakeholders, and then maybe a communications plan. So you won't have to get down to the level of you were going to use every single thing on the one slide. I showed there was like 5 bullets on different things that you can use. But these are some of the tools. And so this model will help you with more of the complex projects. Let me go on to the next slide so we can get into more detail. So I'm going to be able to show you these like these grids, and then how you actually use them and what that actually looks like. And then the last piece was directions of influence, because we definitely want to know those stakeholders and then how are they influencing our project. So we have our stakeholder register here, and then the definition of that. So here's another one you'd want to add to your study material: a project document including the identification, assessment, and classification of project stakeholders. Now, the one thing that you can do as a project manager, and PMI is not going to ding you if you decide, oh, I want to put my stakeholder register in PowerPoint versus Excel. So you don't have to worry about something like that. But what it does is to capture, and it records all the information about your stakeholders, so you know who those individuals are, and then what's the impact going to be on the project, and what they're looking for, so their needs and interests. We want to factor in our OPAs, our organizational process assets. That's a term you're going to hear a lot in PMI's world. And so these are things that you can use to help you with your project. And then the third bullet talks about just keeping it up to date, right? So remember I said maybe we get in requirements and then some new stakeholders are identified, or we have a change request that came up and now we have some new stakeholders. So for your stakeholder register, as you get new stakeholders, you just want to make sure that you are keeping it up to date. So it's not a one and done, it's a living document that you will be updating throughout the life cycle. And then our bullet here just says contains the information necessary to execute the stakeholder engagement plan. And then I'm going to show you what that looks like.
How often should you update this?
So initially, like I said, when you get your project chart and you just getting a project started, you want to go through and identify all the stakeholders you know at that time. And so then as you get to different points throughout that project life cycle, and so you may decide that when we get through the business requirements, I want to go through and take a look at my stakeholder register to see if I have identified any new stakeholders. That could be maybe a milestone or a checkpoint in time. And then when you get to, let's say an issue has come up, so you have your issues log and you're going to be tracking your issues, maybe a new stakeholder comes up then. So there's no right or wrong way or any specified amount of time or duration that you have to do it. It'll really depend on your project. So if you have something that's more complex, then you may want to do it more often. If it's a small effort, you probably won't have a whole lot of changes in your stakeholders. Not to say you won't have any, but it'll probably be a lot less versus on a more complex project. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. And so let's say you had a previous project, it talks about here, you can pull up a stakeholder register. Maybe you wanted to model after one that you've seen that someone else used. Maybe you have some of the same people that you've worked with previously. And so you want to make sure that the information that you put in, because it is a public document, they do point that out here. And so you want to be careful with the information that you put in about, you know, the person. So you don't want to put anything, you know, derogatory or demeaning about a person. It truly is just to understand how they're impacted by your project. Any questions so far? Other questions before we look at the stakeholder register? Okay, so this is an example of one. So again, you know, the person who created this, and you'll have this, I know some people don't have the slides right now, or if you don't have the student workbook, but this was actually a spreadsheet that was reprinted from your student workbook. So you would actually have this, and if you wanted to use it, you know, as a model, there's nothing that says you can't use it right now if you have a project and you wanted to go and use this for, you know, for yourself. But again, you can see we have name, we have our title of the person, whether or not they're an internal or external stakeholder, what their role is in the project, what are some of their requirements that they are wanting this project to achieve, what are their expectations, and then their influence. So it talks about, are they a champion? You see here, they're a champion, they're a supporter, resistor, you know, or it's neutral. So these are just some of the adverbs or verbs, or I could say, or adjectives rather, of the person who is the actual stakeholder. And so you're really fitting them into this register here. And it's a one-shot view, which is very nice. It's laid out here, and it's very easy for you to follow. So I can look at Eugene, who's the CEO. He's running the company. He's a sponsor. He's the one who's paying for it. He wants a successful completion of this project. He also expects us to do it on time, and he wants us to have successful partnerships, right? We have a lot of internal and other external stakeholders, and he's our champion, right? So that's how you read that, and then you just list all the people, you know, all the stakeholders. So again, if it's a small effort, you probably won't have that many stakeholders. But if it's a complex project, then yes, you're probably going to have a lot more names that you're going to see in whatever document that you decide, you know, to use, be it, you know, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, however you, whatever format that you want to use. But these are some of the things that you would just want to take into consideration. Make sense? Any questions on the stakeholder register? Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm not overlooking anybody in case you can't get off mute fast enough. Okay, so now we want to know your stakeholders, right? Don't just focus on their job title. And so some of this can be a little bit confusing, right? So as we think about power and influence, right? So power is the level of authority, right? The actual, and usually that comes from, when we think about, I gave the example of, you know, someone being a vice president, right? So in that job, that does come with a certain power, and it's not just perceived power, it's actually real power, right? Because you can't always look at someone's job title too and be able to tell what their level of authority is. So this is where, you know, you want to get down and look at, so we talk about power, right? And like I said, their level of authority, but it doesn't always mean that the person has to be a VP. I want to make sure I don't cause confusion there, just thinking, oh, if they're not a leadership, that they don't have power, because there are people who are not in a leadership role, but they still have power because they've been given that power and to be able to make decisions and to move things forward. So leadership is a position of control. It says given to individuals within an organization to foster overall effective and efficient function, right? Authority is the right to exercise power. So it is usually delegated to a person by formal means. So remember I mentioned like that project charter. So in PMI's world, you have that project charter, and as the project manager, you have that power, you have that authority to run that project, which is why I told you at the very beginning, when you're thinking about this material, think about it in PMI terms. Don't think about it in AT&T terms, because you may be a project manager here and in your day-to-day role, but oftentimes the people don't work for you. So they just really dotted line. You're just trying to manage that project. They all have a boss outside of your project. And you often have to go to your, maybe your associate director or your director, you know, to be able to get the approval to make decisions. In PMI's world, it doesn't work that way. The project manager is leading that project, and that project charter gives them that authority, that power to be able to go in and to make decisions and to lead and manage that project. So that project charter gives them that formal delegation for them to do that. So again, as a project manager, you're not a leadership, you know, per se, like an executive level, but you still have that power. So I don't want to, like I say, confuse anyone with thinking, oh, just because you're not, you know, a VP or a president or, you know, AVP, that's what they are, that they're talking about when it comes to power, right? So don't think of power and leadership as the same things. Did I confuse anybody? Because I want to make sure that I don't do that. Okay. The second thing we talk about here is interest. So level of concern about the project outcomes, right? So in the register, you notice how we had the names of all of the people. We had their requirements and what their expectations are. So we want to make sure that we understand that, because if we are not meeting their needs and they are a key stakeholder in our project, then, you know, we can have a problem, right? So we want to make sure that we understand what their concern is. So let me think of an example. Sometimes we work with vendors. We have contracts where the vendor is going to bill something for us, right? If that vendor doesn't bill that product, that service that we were expecting them to do, then maybe we don't even want to work with that vendor again, right? If it's, we had talked about a government project, right? There's mandates, there can be fines, so you can have other repercussions. So that's why when you're looking at your stakeholder, and especially if it's something, you know, with government, you definitely want to make sure that you, that's something you would be ranking as high. So you want to make sure that you are meeting those needs, because you don't want to have a problem where, like I said, contract terms aren't met, there's fines or different things like that, or, you know, more so than just if we are delaying a deployment of some code, right? So depending upon what that code we're trying to deliver, maybe if it slipped a week, it's not a big deal. But if you're working on a government project and you slipped a week, there could be other, you know, bigger repercussions as a result of that, because maybe there could be some fines. And then the last piece here on our influence, AKA our attitude or impact. So the ability to influence our project outcome or changes to planning and execution, right? And then the magnitude of the potential contribution or disruption. So in that matrix, it talks about here using these descriptive terms. We talked about champion, supporter, neutral, and a detractor, right? So all those individual roles, and depending upon what role that stakeholder is fulfilling in terms of their influence, you just want to be able to keep that you know, at the forefront and keep it all in that stakeholder register. And then our exclamation point here, and PMI does this when they really want to point out important things that they want you to know. So tailor your stakeholder assessments to suit your project needs. The goal of this exercise is to facilitate your planning of effective communication with the stakeholders, right? So we know that they are very important. We don't want to leave them out, at least not intentionally, right? That's why we want to go back and reassess. We look at it, do we need to add new stakeholders, and truly understand what their role is on our project, and not just focus on their title. Because I'm sure many of you have probably worked with people, they didn't have a title that would tell you, oh, this person, you know, is in charge of something, but they can be very knowledgeable. They may be a SME, and not having that person's input on your project could be the difference between succeeding and failing, right? So any questions on any of the information here on this slide or anything we covered up to this point? And please don't hesitate to come off mute to have if you have a question, or post it in chat. If something isn't clear, or if I don't address a question that you have, please let me know, because I would hate for someone, to walk away and you had a question and you didn't have the opportunity to ask it. So now we'll go on to our next slide, which is our stakeholder mapping. So remember, I talked about some of the grids that we would have. So this is that view, so you can see what it looks like on how you could map your stakeholders. So we have our power on our left axis here, and then on the running across the bottom is the interest. So we look at monitor, keep informed, manage closely, and keep satisfied. So depending upon where your stakeholder falls in this grid would determine maybe some of the things you would have to do, or some additional monitoring things that you may have to do for that stakeholder. And you will put so what they don't want you to do here is put names, right? So if I were looking at the CEO and he has already told us that, we know that's our sponsor, he wants a successful completion of our project, we know he's going to be up here in this upper quadrant, right? We're going to really make sure that we want to satisfy him. Now, if it's someone down here where they're not quite as high, where we have to maybe do some extra things to keep them informed. So, it may be down here in the lower part of this quadrant here. And so again, you don't want to put names, and they have a system where you can just maybe take like numbers, and you can assign a number to a stakeholder. So you'll know who that stakeholder is as the project manager, but it helps keep the anonymity there, and also where you're not calling out names. Because let's say you put someone down here as low, and they may think, oh, I should be high. And maybe, and some of this is subjective. I have to admit that it is. So when you look at how do we think about the impact that this person is going to have, right? So we want to be able to put all this information together, and this is just a tool that you can use to help you do that. And Alan, I don't know if you remember any of this when you were, on the test, if there's like anything that they show with the grids, or like questions around this. Do you remember?
I don't recall there being anything with the grid itself, like any kind of fill in the blanks type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was one question on that, but it was where it had like a grid that you had to basically fill out, but it wasn't related to this.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So this is just really to help the team and to help the project managers, just to be able to understand where they fall. And again, so remember I said at the very beginning, right? I don't know if any of you have ever done this here at AT&T for any of your projects. So that's why I was saying, think about this all from PMI's point of view, not from what you do day to day here at AT&T, because you may not do this, but in PMI's world, this is something that you would do and would be responsible for as a project manager. Okay, now we get into more about the our directions of influence. I don't know if this tool. Oh, that's the actual tool. Okay, so let me go back up here. Sorry, I wanted to see what that little tool sign was. Okay, so on our directions of influence. So PMI wants you to understand the social network of your project stakeholders, specifically the direction of their influence to the project. And it lists 4 ways that they could influence it. So upward, right? So your parent organization. So these are your senior management in business and financial interests. Downward in the prior project hierarchy, team or specialist. So these are the people who they are contributing their knowledge to the project, and they may have skills that are like in a temporary type of capacity. So when you think about specialists, you may call somebody in just for like a certain point in time and to be on your project. And so that's where this is thinking of, downward. And then outward. So outward meaning these are groups of people who are outside of your project team. So remember we talked about government. So you probably won't have someone from, the FCC sitting on your project team, but depending upon the project, who knows? It's not to say that you can't, but you probably wouldn't, but they're still going to be a stakeholder. But these are people who are outside of your project team. So think about government, think about your suppliers, the public, because remember community was on that one of the very first slides we talked about. And then sideward, friendly or competitive for resources. So project managers, peers, and other departments that you may have to need some of these people who are, and unfortunately, we think about times of like resources when things get teams get constrained and you're trying to maybe get a resource and another project management or another project is trying to get some of those same resources, and hopefully, people are able to collaborate together and still be able to achieve both of the needs that you would have for those projects. So we have upward, downward, outward, and sideward. Didn't even know sideward was a word, so sideward. Any questions on this? Is the pace okay? I just want to make sure that not going too fast.
Would this be on the test, like this type of the upward, downward, outward, and sideward?
No, you're not going to see a question that's going to have like a chart like this and that they're wanting you to explain what each one of these is. But a lot of what PMI does is situational in some of the questions that they will give you. So it's a lot of material that you are trying to learn because you really don't know what's going to be on the test. And so some of the things that they point out, like those definitions, they had a little book and I read that for you word for word, something like that. And you just want to make sure that you understand it, because if they gave you a situational question, you just want to be able to understand, what's the difference in these different types of, because this is all about influence that the stakeholders would have on your project.
Yeah, and I would say just, because the test is kind of fresh in my mind, that almost the entire test is situational questions.
Mm-hmm. That's how it was for me too when I took it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they may ask you something like, "This is happening on your project. What do you do next?" Or "What's the best course of action?" Or "Who should you go to do X?" Those are kind of those are your the way your questions are going to be formatted.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. And see, that's the good thing about having you here as my co-instructor tonight, having taken the test very recently. But I can say that when I took it too, it was situational as well. So, and then the other thing too, another tip, as you are studying your material, depending upon when you plan to take the exam, just make sure you keep studying so you can keep this material fresh in your mind. Because oftentimes when things become cold storage, you kind of forget about it. But if you know it's going to be 2 months before you take the test or 3 months, just keep studying on a regular basis so it's still fresh. Okay, so this tool now that we're going to talk about right here, this salience model. So this is the one where if you have a very large or complex project, and I'm trying to get the rest of this to paint. Okay, here we go. So here's another one of our definitions. Focus on the product owner role. Are they familiar, interested, and engaged enough with the project to make decisions and move the project forward? So we have 3 things in this model that we want to make sure that we are taking into consideration. So again, using this model is just another way for us to assess our stakeholders based on their level of authority, their immediate needs, so that's the urgency, and then how appropriate their involvement is in terms of the project legitimacy. So appropriate involvement or proximity as applied to team stakeholders, indicating level of involvement within the project. So these 3 items make up the salience model. And again, for this particular model, this is something that you would do more on a complex project. So you have lots of moving parts, lots of stakeholders, and this is where this may be able to help you. So we think about our urgency. So level of required attention and detail. We have our time constraints, and it's high stakes, right? So that's our urgency. And then our legitimacy, and then our power. We talked about the level of authority. So we want to understand what power each of your stakeholders, what do they bring to your project. And then I don't know if any of you work with agile projects, because that's what I mostly do now. I did work on legacy things years ago, but now I've been in an agile space. And there's a term or a role in agile that's called a product owner, and then it has the in bold here. So you will hear that in the agile world. And so when we think about these 3 things, urgency, legitimacy, and power, and we have our product owner, want to make sure that, do they understand the current situation? Can that person help you move your project forward? So that ultimate goal, that vision you're trying to achieve, and can they make changes when they are required? So if you're working on a legacy project, you may not have a product owner, but there should be some business owner or stakeholder that's on it that you will be able to go to, and if you have those questions like that, and to be able to address them for you, right? So again, just another way for you to be able to go in and classify your stakeholders. So just understand this model, understand the things that it's trying to achieve, and then if you did have some situational question around, the salience model, again, it's for more complex projects. It's not going to be for, a very small project, because in the smaller projects, you won't have that many stakeholders. Any question on this one? Okay, we're about halfway through. Everybody good? Keep going?
Keep going.
All right. Okay, we have stakeholder perceptions next, right? So when we think about perceptions, it says must be holistically understood in customer-centric project management approaches and can be damaging to a project, whether they are negative or positive. So you would typically think if something is positive, how could it damage a project? So it says, why do you think it's important to understand both positive and negative stakeholder perceptions of your project? So here's our interactive part again. So who would like to maybe share on why you feel or would think it's important to understand positive and negative stakeholder perceptions of your project?
They might not
Anybody
see the
want
value. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, go ahead. That's what I want to do. I want to get your feedback, and just think about it. This is not any right or wrong answers. And so if you think about things that you've done, and even in projects that you are managing, and if your stakeholders, if they were overly positive, were they overly negative? So how did they perceive your project? So there are not any right or wrong answers, and it's not always, black and white, because I may think of something negative, but you may think of it being positive, right? So remember, it talked about in that stakeholder register, there was one classification where someone could be a detractor, right? So if someone's a detractor, how could that impact your project?
It could slow things down. It could put like more obstacles in the way as you try to complete the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What if someone's just overly positive?
And sometimes you miss things. If they're overly positive,
Yep.
sometimes you need to have someone
Mhm.
who's going to give you the real critique on what's going on.
Right. Right. And you want people to feel comfortable and to be able to speak up, right? That's why I said with the class, I want it to be interactive for all of you. I want you to be able to share some of your experiences, your thoughts, and it doesn't have to be necessarily all about AT&T. There are people who worked at other companies before they came here. And I used to work at IBM before I came here. So you have different experiences. Some of you may have, businesses, or you're involved in groups or community things. And a project can cover a wide range of things. And this is why I love project management, because it crosses all industries. So it doesn't matter if you're working at AT&T or if you're working at Home Depot. If you're managing an anniversary party or birthday party, you can still project manage everything in some way, shape, or form. So this time that you're putting into this is really of value, because you can use these skills that you are learning as you get your certification. It will not be wasteful. You will be able to use it every day in some way, shape, or form, either sitting here at work or doing something at home. And so while you may not have stakeholders on, maybe like a home project you're doing, unless it's, it could be your family member, could be your stakeholders. But when you think about, like some of the projects, so you do just want to keep in mind here, what this is just trying to drive is, either positive, it can be negative, but just think about how their perceptions and what it could potentially do to your project. So that's the whole point of this. Okay, now I want to capture our stakeholder feedback and their perceptions, and then we'll get into on how you can go about doing this. So we look at, and these are things as project managers, right, that would also help us. So our interpersonal skills, active listening, emotional intelligence, and effective communication method. And we look at our stakeholders, right? Interview to understand the project requirements, vision, and communication preferences. So this is what we're going to do with our stakeholders. We talked about at the beginning, maybe that's a questionnaire or survey. We may be doing some brainstorming, but we're really trying to get to know our stakeholders. And then we do have a list of who's going to be key. And then we have other stakeholders. So what's appropriate for those individuals? What type of communication are we going to do? So maybe with our key stakeholders, we may decide that we want to meet with them face to face. So right up front, we want to build that relationship with them. So maybe if you're co-located with someone and you're able to do that, or you get on a video conference, or, whatever, way you choose to do that, but you really want to try to get to know them so that you can make sure you understand their requirements, what they're looking to achieve, how they're going to impact your project, what are their communication preferences, right? There are people who don't want to email, they want you to text them, they want you to call them, we have MS Teams, we have social media. There's so many ways that you can communicate with the person, but if you're going to understand your key stakeholders, what they prefer, then that'll just help things move a little bit smoother along. The second group here, like maybe this is like part of your project team. You may have a meeting every week and you just bring people in, you do a status, you send out an email, you send out a status report, but you're able to still get information from them and then understand what's the best way to keep them informed about your project. And then the last one talks about these large and public groups. So we have questionnaires and surveys, some type of facilitated conversation or session, be it either online or in person. I talked about social media, group chats. We have like MS Teams. We have email campaigns that go out, posters, advertisements, and a lot of that can be, I know where I live, you can ride down the freeway and they have actually these giant digital display billboards. So there's so many ways of, communication. So just depending upon what you're trying, to achieve, and then what information that you are trying to gather. And when you're trying to do something from a large group of people, obviously you probably can't sit down one-on-one with them, right? That just wouldn't be feasible for you, for you to do that. But if you had some type of a session where you told people, okay, we're going to meet this day and time, here's one session, here's another time where people can come in, and then if you wanted to do something in person where you could, then that would be a good way for you to do that. And, remember again, as project managers, right, I said most of what we do is communication, right? So 90% of what we do is communication. There are different soft skills that we can use and things that we can do to help us be more effective, in our job. So I would highly encourage you. I mean, all of us can always learn and do new things and improve how we are doing our day-to-day job. But in here, we're just really trying to get that feedback from our stakeholders and then to understand their perceptions. Any questions on this one? Okay. Now we plan to communicate with our stakeholders. So we have another definition here. Okay, so these are two things we are going to talk about here. Our stakeholder engagement plan, a component of the project management plan that identifies the strategies and actions required to promote productive involvement of stakeholders in project or program decision-making and execution, used to understand stakeholder communication requirements and the level of stakeholder engagement in order to assess and adapt to the level of stakeholder participation in requirements activities. So very long definition, the formal definition of it, but it just identifies what is required to our required management strategies to effectively engage our stakeholders. And then we have our communication plan, which is a component of the project, program, or portfolio management plan that describes how, when, and by whom information about the project will be administered and disseminated. So team fulfill strategies via communications described in the communication plan. So two more definitions that you want to add to your study material so that you can understand what both of these are and how they are used. And then we'll be using this along with our stakeholder register, which we created up front, right? So once we identify who all those stakeholders are, now we want to know how are we going to engage them and how are we going to communicate to them. And then there's going to be different levels of communication depending upon the stakeholder. So what you give to your sponsor may be totally different from how you communicate with your project team. So you can get really down into the weeds with your project team. You may not want to do that with your project sponsor, unless he or she is the type of person that wants that level of detail. But normally just based on how busy they are and all the things that they're involved in, you probably want to be able to knit it out. And again, that's where the communication piece becomes so important, and just being able to understand what it is they would like to see, how they want you to communicate with them, what their expectations are, what's the frequency, how often do they want you to communicate with them? Is it weekly, is it bi-weekly, is it once a month? Do they want to just understand when there's a problem? And how do they want you to inform them if there is a problem with the project? So you just want to continually, and again, a lot of these documents, because these will be formal documents, and like I say, whether you put them in Excel or you put them in Word, whatever tool you decide to use, you just have to, have these plans, and you just want to make sure you review it and you keep them up to date. So questions on either of these, the stakeholder engagement plan or the communication management plan? Okay. Now we get into our communication requirements analysis. So this will help us to lead to a clear articulation of our stakeholders' communication needs. And as you are going through this material, you'll see some of it, it may seem like it's being repetitive, but it's designed to be able to help to reinforce some of the concepts so you get used to some of the terminology and the things that PMI is looking for. So we enables effective choices about our communication topics. We talk about our frequency, models, and technologies. And then the output is a grid, questionnaire, or survey that's going to document our communication and our technology requirements for each stakeholder. So you're going to break this down for each of your stakeholders. And again, what you do for a key stakeholder versus maybe if you are dealing with like the public or a supplier, those two things, they're going to look they're going to look different, right? And so this is just to help you as a project manager to be able to make sure that you are managing your stakeholders, you're understanding what their needs are, and that everyone on the team does. Because a lot of these documents that you create, you would be sharing these with your project team. So it's not something that you have to do in a vacuum or you just put in a binder somewhere or, in a folder and you never look at it again. So a lot of these are living documents, and you do want to share it with the team because then it helps keep everybody in alignment and they're on the same page. Okay. So communication methods and technologies. So here's a couple questions for you. Do you use any other communication method or techniques on your projects, right? So we have meetings. We love meetings, right? And those meetings, most of us have virtual, like what we're doing right now. We have virtual calls. If you're fortunate to be in a hub or a place where you're with your team, you can do your face-to-face meetings, or you can get on the phone and talk to someone. We have our digital and electronics. I talked about social media. We have instant messaging. We have MS Teams. You can text message somebody. Email. I don't know how much faxing we do. Who does a lot of faxing still? Can you think of someone who still does faxing?
Like architecture firms,
Government,
Okay.
law
Okay.
offices.
Yeah.
government,
What
doctor's
was the last one?
offices.
Yes, doctor's office. Yes, right. So these, right, so they still do that. So fax isn't dead, right? We still, or we'll still see that as a form of communication. And then physical, we talked about body language and gestures, whiteboarding. So if we were all in the classroom together, I would be able to see you and you would be able to see me. And if, as I'm teaching and I'm looking at you, you could read my body language, I could read yours. So if I thought that you weren't understanding something that I said to you, maybe there was an expression on your face or a look, I could cue into that and be able to say, oh, you know what, maybe I didn't explain that right, so I need to go back and go over it again, or maybe I confused them, And so when we're in this virtual world, if you're not on video, we don't really have that, right? So now you're just relying upon the fact that if I'm asking you a question or I'm asking you to share something with me, that I'm hoping that what I'm telling you, that you're understanding it the way I'm hoping that you are understanding it, versus did I just confuse you and send you down a bunny trail, which is not going to help you. So is there anything else not on this list that maybe you all have used or can think of as another form of communication or some other technology that you can use to communicate? This list is pretty comprehensive, but I think it really does cover just about, I can't think of anything else, which is why I was asking if any of you could think of anything else that you have used from a communication method or some other technology that you may have used. We work for the phone company, but a lot of us don't call people, right? Because a lot of times if you call them, they're already on the phone, right? They're in a meeting. So, but we still do have that option to be able to pick up the phone and call someone. What about things that organization does not allow? Can you think of something that is not allowed? Facebook, right? Some people can't access Facebook here from work or other social media tools. It's blocked if you try to go out there. So it just depends on maybe the business unit that you're in or whether or not that is something that would be allowed for you to be able to do that. So if you were going to use Facebook as a way to communicate with your project team, you'd have to make sure that is something that would be allowed. Anybody think of anything else that maybe would be allowed? Okay, but I think you all get the idea. So next we're going to talk about some communication methods. So we talk about push versus pull. So in push, So I'm giving you information. So I'm the sender. I could be sending you an email, I might send you a text, I pick up the phone and I call you. So I'm pushing that information to you, right? In the pull method, I maybe put some information out there and you have to go and get it. So if right now, if I went out to our chat and I posted some information out there, the expectation is you are reading the chat, you're pulling the information. I posted a link in there, I need you to go out there, pull up that link and read that information, right? So you determine that you want to read it, when you want to read it, what's the timing of when you want to read that information, right? So two ways, push, pull, in terms of information and how that information gets out. And so right now we're in this virtual space. We could be sitting down next to each other in a room, having a conversation where we're going back and forth. A lot of our conference rooms, they talk about whiteboarding. We have whiteboards, you can write things down. In our chat here, there's a whiteboarding space where you could open up a whiteboard and people could start writing information here. There's tools that you can use to be able to do that. And then when they talk about agile teams, for those of you that work on agile projects like I do, it's best where you can be co-located, if at all possible, because it really depends on people being there together, you're collaborating, and it's a lot harder if, not that you can't do it, but it just works best if teams are co-located. So there's been a big push within our company to get people to be co-located. We have certain hubs, and now people are being asked to be a part of those hubs in their jobs. So that's a way to be able to foster communication. So any questions on push versus pull from a communication expectation? And the other thing too, when you're thinking about the technologies that you use, you also want to keep in mind how urgent is that message that you're trying to get out to the person. And then what happens if the tool that you want to use isn't available, right? What if it went down? What if it's not an easy to use tool that you're asking, everyone to do? So these are different things that you want to be able to, to keep in mind. And also we work geographically with a lot of different people across our company and across the world, all these different time zones. Even right now, I'm in California, so I'm West Coast. Many of you are in Eastern or in Central time zone. So we are working across multiple time zones. So if I wanted to get a message and I wanted everybody to be able to see it, well, I want to make sure that I will try to pick a time that at least I know that everyone's on board, that we're all here. So if I did something at 9 o'clock Pacific time, well, it's 11 Central, it's 12 Eastern. So people are still around. But if I sent it out at 4 o'clock Pacific, well, in the other time zones, most people are already gone. If it was an urgent message, for me to send it out at 4 p.m. my time and expect someone to do something with it, it's probably not going to happen because people have already gone for the day. So these are just some of the things that you would, need to think about. Also, is it confidential? So you want to be careful where you're putting information out. You don't want to put anything confidential out in social media because we do have policies, and most companies do around that, around our REM, and which is our, which talks about how we have to keep documentation, like from a legal perspective or regulatory perspective. We have to think about from an accessibility perspective, what if you have people who are part of your project team that may have a disability? So how do you communicate with them? So there are a lot of things that you do have to think about when you are sending information out to your team. So any questions on push versus pull? So we talked about some of this here in terms of like some of our challenges, right? Which I remember I said how urgent. If it's really urgent, I don't want to see the urgent message when it's 4 o'clock my time when I know you're already gone. We think about the technology. Is it easy to use? We talk about, languages. Is it sensitive? So these are just some of the things that I was just talking about as we were on the previous slide, but it's just laid out here for you to see it in black and white and just to be able to know these are some of the things that you want to think about when you are communicating with your stakeholders. I don't think any of this would be a surprise, but just some things for you to think about. So this here is an example. This is our cross-cultural communication model. So it's giving an example of a transmission. So depending on the method, what kinds of noise can play a part. So when you think about messages, when you are sending it out, so if you send out an email, you have a certain intention of when you send that message out. So if Lindsay sent me an email, she's expecting me to be able to read this email and to be able to understand it. And which is why when you're doing, especially things in email, even when you're talking to people, you don't want to just make assumptions that they understood. Because what if English isn't their first language, right? And so, or sometimes we use slang or acronyms. Lord knows we use a lot of acronyms in AT&T. And if I'm sending out a message and I'm sending out a bunch of acronyms, people may not understand what I'm talking about. And what if the acronym was used and had more than one meaning to it? How would the person know? So this model here is talking about, on the left side here, the current emotional state. So we have our culture, and then we think about there's generational, say national, we have gender, talks about personality biases. We all make assumptions. I mean, we're all human, right? And then, so this message is going across, right? So if I send the message and I want you to be able to acknowledge my message, and then are you going to give me any feedback on this message? So this is just a model just for you to think about when you're sending a message. It doesn't have to always be an email because we are talking, right? If someone was on this call today and if they didn't understand English, then if that person didn't have a translator or a way to break down what I'm saying, they wouldn't understand me, right? So we have generational differences. We have people here from all walks of life, all ages. We all have different experiences. But when you think about your project, right, you could have all these different things in your project, right? So when you are sending out your messages to people, you and to your team, this is just a way, what this model wants you to do is just to be able to understand all these different dynamics that you are going to have to think about. And it's not just the straight, oh, I'm just going to send out an email message, and it's done. You want to be able to think about all the things that could impact that message and how that message may be understood or misunderstood in some cases. Does that make sense? You probably won't have, again, you won't see this diagram on the test. So again, a lot of these things, would be situational. And then it talks about here when this question about noise, how does noise play into it? So if someone is not understanding your message, right? If you put in a bunch of acronyms in your email, that might be noise because they don't understand it. Alan, I don't know if you remember this from the exam, if it talked anything about this particular communication model, cross-cultural communication model. Because I know, like I said, we do have people from all walks of life and different people that we work with on our projects as well as our, with our stakeholders.
No, I don't recall anything that was specific to this.
Okay. Yeah,
But I can imagine a situational question though with this. I mean, they ask you if you're in a sending a message to a stakeholder and they don't seem to understand your message, how do you address it? And this would kind of like, you can't just send messages that have a lot of noise. Like I know, like you said with AT&T, that's one of my things. I'm like, don't add one more acronym in this message. I cannot. Is this English or what is this? And it's like, please. And then you have acronyms used in different places to mean different things. And I feel as if I'm having to get, like, I need a dictionary. I mean, we used to have, was it MOTS or whatever, or what was the other tool you had that you could go and put the acronyms to find out what stuff is, and I had to be using that a lot because I'm like,
Yes,
there's too much noise in this email. I can't read it at all.
right. Yes,
Yeah,
and mhm.
yeah, I was going to
Go
say,
ahead,
and talking
Alan.
about the exam, the questions I remember were more, there was some stuff that was more along the lines of the push pull type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, if this is happening, what would be the best way to communicate this, and it would be like, put it in a repository, or set up a conference call, something like, something along those
Mm-hmm.
lines. That there was questions
Okay.
on that, not so much on, you know but I could see, a question coming up saying, you know, part of your team is overseas and they don't really understand or they don't have the same, it's not the same culture as the
Mm-hmm.
people you have in your immediate office. How would you
Mm-hmm.
go about, what would be the best way to communicate something? So that's
Right.
not to say that that won't show up. It's, 'cause I'm sure there's, tons of different versions of the test out there. So
Mm-hmm. Right. You never know which one you're going to get. And then, let me do the definition here. So I should have started that first. So this is a formal definition of the communication model, a description, analogy, or schematic used to represent how the communication process will be performed for the project. So that's another one that you can add
yeah,
to your study material.
yeah. But I will say, I like the way you're thinking, in terms of how the question could come up, rather than trying to memorize a chart like what you're looking at in front of you. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
think of, well, where would this come into play? Like, where would I use this information? And thinking of something situational is definitely what you want to do, because that's what the test is going to throw at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Salvation, too, for your feedback. Does anyone else have any other comments that you would like to share on this? Okay. So our stakeholder engagement strategy. So we want to involve our stakeholders, right? We want to enable appropriate management strategies, and then we want to create and maintain those relationships. So again, it's not a one and done. So we are going to have our communications management plan. We're going to have our stakeholder engagement plan. And that's how we know we are going to be able to communicate with all of our stakeholders. And then we want to make sure that we keep them involved in our project, because they already told us what they're interested in and what they expect from the project. So we want to make sure that we are looking at that again. So it's not about one and done. This is going to be, think of these as more living documents that we will just maintain throughout the project. And then also, we just talked about the whole thing around sending messages, noise, making sure that if we are see a bunch of noise coming out there from different things, and we just want to make sure we address it, because sometimes those things can help hinder us and keep our project from being able to to move forward. And again, remember, we are a global company, so we have people from different countries. Even in this country, we have 50 states. And what someone does in New York is different from what they do in Texas, right? So we have even some of those type of things, so we can all learn from each other, and it just helps us to be able to learn more about each other, learn more about, maybe their project, because maybe I may think of something, Alan may think of something else. And so we are, and we're both stakeholders, and we're trying to make sure that in the end we are successful in our project, because that's really what that's all about. And so, those soft skills, so there's a lot of soft skills as a project manager, and there's, training. So if you feel like, okay, I'm not good with public speaking, or I could, write a little bit better, I mean, those are things that you can do, and there's training and things to help you to be able to excel in those areas and to do well. No one's going to be all things to all people, so you don't have to worry about it. It's not about being perfect. But again, with this information, these are just foundational things that PMI is laying out for you. And that's why I said learn it from PMI's point of view. If these terms don't make sense to you, you can always go back and review them. You are all assigned to mentor groups, so there's another forum for you to be able, to talk to people. And then the last thing here that we are going to go over, this is an example of a stakeholder engagement matrix. So it says you want to tailor your labels for your stakeholder, for stakeholder levels of engagement to context, team, or organization. And they point out here, which is important, which I mentioned this earlier on, about not to use names, but to give them a number. Number one might be your CEO, but you know that. But others don't, you know, on the project may not know it, because if you're putting something in here, you're not trying to say anything negative about a person. So it's not about that. This is about being able to understand all those stakeholders. And then what are they doing? So this is what it would look like, filled out. So your stakeholder number one, they're supportive, and then which is with D, which means the desired engagement level, is supportive, and then for leading, it's current engagement level. So this is being able to help you populate for each of your stakeholders, where are they currently, and then what is the desired engagement level. So if you have a sponsor, and if your sponsor just ghosted you and they're never around and you don't see them and they're not engaged in your project, that's going to be a problem, because you're going to need your sponsor to be engaged. You need your team. So you're going to go through for all your stakeholders, and then you are going to fill out this matrix. So this is just another way for you to be able to help you manage your stakeholders, and then to understand where they are in terms of their engagement level. So where they currently are right now, and then what's the desired level you would like them to have. Okay. Any questions on this one? All right, well, we've gotten through all of the materials. So our ECHO coverage for tonight was on this is 1.9, so to collaborate with our stakeholders. So we evaluated the engagement needs for the stakeholders. On 2.4, we engage our stakeholders. So we analyzed it, we used that power interest grid, the influence and impact, categorize our stakeholders, and then we develop and execute and validate a strategy for that stakeholder engagement. And then 2.2, which is managed communication. So as we've identified our stakeholders, we also talk about what are the needs that they expect, and then what's the best way for us to communicate with them. So those are the items that we covered in our class tonight. What questions do you all have? Is there anything that you need me to go back over? Just want to open it up right now. Everyone okay? Is there any? Thank you, Salvation. Does anyone have any other questions? Alan, is there anything that you would like to add before we wrap up, or?
Can I ask a question for Alan, since he just took the test recently?
Yes, you may.
Alan, what would you say was the most important thing that you studied? Was it the read a book? Was it the YouTube videos? Like, if there's, like, I know we should be studying everything, but what do you think we should focus our attention on the most that's going to actually help us with the test?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of different studying. I did reading, I did study groups, I did, I did practice tests. But what I really found helpful, there's actually a guy on YouTube that his name is David McLaren, I think his name is. I can get the name for y'all, but he's got some videos that he goes over, and I'm going to warn you, they're very long. But he basically goes over, I think it's like 200 agile questions, like 150 waterfall questions. He's got a bunch of different video series on the PMP. Some of it's taken from the 6th edition, some of it's taken from the 7th edition. And they're all situational based questions that he goes over. And what I like about him is he doesn't just read the question and just pick the answer and move on. He actually goes through every single response, every single answer. And what's really good about that is, and I'll tell you, and this is where a lot of people I think will get tripped up, is a lot of times there's more than one quote unquote right answer, but what they're looking for is the best answer. So you don't want to go into a question, read the first answer and say, oh, that seems logical, I'll pick that one. Well, lo and behold, two or three answers down, there was an answer that is a better choice for the situation. So me personally, it was there was some videos that I watched that went over those, and that's what really helped me kind of get the right mindset as to how to take the test, right? um, I think that's the best way to describe it. But again, what Salvation was mentioning about looking at something and saying, well, how could I phrase this in a situational question? I think that's really the best way to look at it, is rather than just memorizing facts and memorizing charts and things like that, figure out, well, how does this, what in what situation would I use this?
I have a follow-up question again. So,
Yes.
did you read the books from cover to cover, like sixth edition, seventh edition, Rita Mulcahy, or any of
I didn't.
you did?
No, I did not. I did not read the books cover to cover because if you do, I mean, it would be great for bedtime because it will put you to sleep.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I started and
yeah,
I can tell you it's really, really, I mean, I was,
yeah,
I totally agree. So,
yeah.
I
I
use
think
Velociteach. I use Velociteach was how to pass the PMP on the first try, I think is what it's called, because they had as part of the study guide, you had access to like taking exams, because the more you can do those practice questions and just keep doing them over and over again, because you want to get used to the way the question can be framed and like we talk about situational, because that may be something that you don't typically do, but for the purposes of the exam, you want to be able to like change that your thinking and your mindset. So the more practice exams that you can take, it just helps to reinforce some of the concepts. And there's a lot of like study groups and different things that are out there that you can join. But you don't want to totally overwhelm yourself. I mean, on the day of the test, don't be sitting in the parking lot still studying. I mean, I wouldn't recommend you do that. If you don't know it by the day of the exam, I mean, sitting in the parking lot studying is only going to, confuse you, and you'll start having, some doubts. But if you can just do this along the way, pace yourself, just keep studying to keep the material fresh in your mind, understand those concepts. So what is it that PMI is trying, to tell you? PMI is not going to tell you, well, SEMA, you need to use Excel versus, Microsoft Word for your stakeholder register. They're not going to tell you that. So they're really trying to get you to understand the concept, the foundation, and also remember, you as the project manager, you're leading the project. You're not running to your associate director or your director to ask them if you can make a decision to do something on your project, which is what we do here at AT&T. And PMI's where you don't do that.
yeah, so
You're
the
running the
reason I
project.
asked from cover to cover is that you said you have to understand the concept. So to understand the concept, do we need to read those books cover to cover, or any particular book, like maybe Rita Mulcahy or seventh edition or sixth edition? So that's why I asked that question.
Right. No, it is a good question. I know people have different styles in terms of learning. So if typically for you, if it helps you to read something cover to cover and that gives you more of that comfort level and understanding, then that's what you should do. There's other people who are like, give me the Cliff Notes. That's all I want to read, right? It's not right or wrong, but it's just a different style that you may have. And so it's a lot of material. I'm not going to tell you it's not. It's a lot of material. We try to break these lessons up, to help you, and then to use your mentoring groups and other things to help supplement what you learn in the classes here, and then how to apply it.
Yeah, I started reading sixth edition, and Ellen is right. I was, in about a few minutes, I was ready to doze off. So, so it's very dry. So that's why I asked. Thank you.
Right. Oh, you're welcome. Does anyone else have a question or comment, anything that you would like to add? Well, I do appreciate your time. I know this is a lot after working all day and then this commitment that you have made to get your PMP certification. I totally support you and wish you well with your journey as you study and prepare to take the exam. If there's anything I can do to help you along the way, feel free to reach out. If you have any questions or anything that you wish you had asked me, I just want to make sure that I don't leave anyone's question unanswered. And if not, I wish you all a wonderful evening. I will go ahead and stop the recording, and it will be available for you all to review as needed.
Thank you, Melissa.
You are